Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Sip&Talkers, wherever you are in the world, and welcome back to Sip&Talk.
You sound a little fragile today.
I am so fragile. If my voice sounds a bit weak, it's because for the last 24 hours, I've been conducting a little, let's call it a body experiment.
Oh, here we go.
You know what I'm talking about.
Talk show.
I did the big one, the time-restricted eating, the TRE, what everyone in Asia calls 168. And I have to say, I successfully made it 16 hours without food. I felt like a self-disciplined superhero.
Oh, a superhero, right. And I seem to recall this superhero had a celebratory meal planned for the 2 p.m. finish line. Something about a new hamburger joint.
Do not remind me. It was a disaster, a total physiological disaster.
Oh, no.
I took 2 bites of that burger and my stomach just went into revolt. I mean, it felt like 2 goblins were having a knife fight in my gut.
What?
The health halo I'd built up for 16 hours just vanished. Gone. Replaced by a desperate search for antacids.
Okay, so you've just perfectly set up our entire deep dive today.
I know, right?
Yeah.
It leads to this whole question. Why does everyone say fasting is this amazing key to health, but the second I ate, my body staged a violent coup?
And that is the physiological truth of fasting. Your stomach pain wasn't necessarily because you fasted, but because your body got the absolute wrong signal after a long, long rest.
The wrong signal.
Think about it. We talked about this. During that fast, stomach acid is just building up, right? There's no food to buffer it. So you're basically marinating your stomach lining.
Yeah.
Then you suddenly drop a massive, greasy, hard-to-digest meal into that sensitive environment. It's a system collapse. So the key isn't that you fast. It's all about how you break the fast.
Okay, so let's use my fasting stomach ache story as our launch pad.
Right.
We need to get into the 2 sides of intermittent fasting, or IF.
Right. On one hand, you have the people calling it a metabolic health holy grail. They're talking about these incredible mechanisms like autophagy, which is basically your body's cellular self-cleaning process.
And improving insulin sensitivity, all of that good stuff. But
Yeah.
we can't just live in an information bubble, right?
Exactly.
Because I saw a headline recently that was, frankly, terrifying. A huge new study came out suggesting that people who eat in a window of less than 8 hours a day,
I know the one you're talking about.
they had a 91% higher risk of death from cardiovascular disease.
91%. It's a staggering number.
So what are we doing here? Are we chasing longevity, or are we accidentally fast-tracking our own demise?
And that's exactly what Sip&Talk is for. That 91% number, it came from a report at the American Heart Association conference. It's explosive, but we have to do our due diligence.
Right. Cross-check it.
We need to cross-check it against the broader scientific consensus. You know, what are the big journals saying? What are the financial papers reporting? We need to ask the right question.
Which is?
Is the risk from the fasting itself, from the clock? Or is it from the, unhealthy behavior of cramming a day's worth of junk food into 7 hours?
Okay, let's do it. Let's break it down. Fasting. Metabolic miracle, or a 91% higher mortality risk.
Before we jump into the chaos, let's just quickly clarify some terms, because people use the word fasting for like a million different things.
Yeah, it's a huge umbrella. I think most people just hear 16.8 and they get the gist.
They do, but scientifically what you did is called time-restricted eating, TRE.
TRE.
That's the official term for schedules like 16.8, where you limit all your calories to a specific window each day, usually, 6 to 10 hours.
So TRE is the method, 16.8, 14.10, that sort of thing.
Precisely. And then you have intermittent fasting, or IF. That's the big category name. It covers TRE, but it also covers other styles.
Like fasting for a whole day.
Exactly. Things like the 5.2 diet, where you eat normally 5 days a week and then have 2 days of really low calories, or alternate day fasting, ADF. So IF is the whole concept. TRE is just the most popular way to do it day to day.
Got it.
Yeah.
Now, with the terms clear, this is where it gets so interesting culturally. Because in the U.S., IF has become, I don't know, it's more than a diet. It's like a competitive sport.
It absolutely is. The explosion in popularity here has been driven by the biohacking movement.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, Hollywood actors, all the longevity people.
And for that crowd, it's not just about dropping a few pounds. They're chasing 2 very specific things: metabolic efficiency and cognitive advantage.
I love that phrase, cognitive advantage. It's this idea that your brain gets sharper, clearer, more focused when you're in a fasted state. Like you can code better or close a deal faster.
That is the core belief. They see it as a way to literally hack their own physiology for peak performance and, anti-aging. It's not just about food. It's a tool for cellular optimization.
And it's not just like fringe stuff, you have major universities studying these mechanisms, right? Harvard, Johns Hopkins.
Yeah.
They're all looking at autophagy and ketones.
Right. And then you have figures like Dr. Jason Fung, who really brought it into the mainstream. He wasn't just talking about vanity weight loss. He was using it as a clinical tool for serious conditions like type 2 diabetes. That gave it a lot of legitimacy.
And the apps. The whole thing has been commercialized so effectively. Apps like Zero make it feel like a game. You track your hours, you get badges. It makes it easy to stick with.
The structure is a huge part of the success, definitely.
But when I look at the difference between that US biohacker mindset and, say, how it's discussed in parts of Asia, the motivation feels completely different.
How so?
Here, it's all about these complex long-term goals, longevity, hacking your system. In many Asian countries where they just call it 168, the conversation seems so much more practical.
More immediate.
Yeah, exactly. It's driven by utility. It's how fast will I lose weight? And is this safe for me? It's less about optimizing your brain for a board meeting and more about tangible results you can see on the scale.
That's a great distinction. It's optimization versus pragmatism. It really shows how culture shapes health trends.
And it brings up that huge behavioral wall, which is the breakfast challenge.
Ah, yes. The most important meal of the day.
Well, in cultures where breakfast is just non-negotiable, 16.8 is a huge hurdle. Because it almost always means you have to skip it. You're not just fighting hunger. You're fighting a lifetime of habit and cultural norms.
That's a critical point. You're battling decades of conditioning that tell you a day must start with food.
And the last piece is the social part. In some circles here in the U.S., saying, oh, I'm fasting till 1, isn't just a diet choice. It's a signal.
A signal of what?
Of self-discipline, of efficiency. It's a subtle status marker that says, I am so in control, I can even manage my own physiological state.
So whether you're doing it for status or for weight loss, you're still restricting that window. Which brings us right back to your unfortunate burger incident.
My poor stomach.
Why does this supposedly optimized system rebel so violently when you finally eat?
Okay, let's get into the science of the pain. My health halo was shattered. You said it was about sending the wrong signal. I need the step-by-step breakdown of why that burger caused a total system meltdown.
Okay, we can break your post-fast agony down into 3 things happening all at once when you eat the wrong food too quickly.
Lay it on me.
First, mechanism, stomach acid, and the missing buffer.
The buffer, meaning food.
Exactly. Most people think your stomach just stops making acid when you fast. It doesn't. Your parietal cells are always secreting hydrochloric acid. It's there to prep for digestion and, crucially, to kill any pathogens you might ingest.
So for 16 hours, that acid was just sitting there with nothing to do.
Pretty much just pooling and concentrating. And if you have even a little bit of mild undiagnosed gastritis, which a lot of people do, that concentrated acid starts to seriously irritate the stomach lining. That's the dull ache you feel before you even eat.
I totally felt that. It went from a dull ache to a sharp burn the second the food hit.
Because when you suddenly drop a dense, high-fat, high-protein meal into that acidic, sensitive environment, your brain screams, emergency.
Emergency battle state.
Yes. It signals for an immediate, massive release of even more digestive fluids and enzymes. And because fat and protein take a long time to break down,
the food just sits there.
It just sits there, stewing in this super concentrated acid bath, which triggers intense muscular spasms. That was your cramping. It's a full-on acidic bombardment.
Okay, that explains the stomach itself. But you mentioned another source of pain, a bit higher up.
Right. And this brings us to the second culprit, which is a big one when fat is involved. The sluggish gallbladder.
The gallbladder. Okay, I know it has to do with fat digestion.
It's basically a little storage sac for bile, which is made by your liver. And bile is like detergent for fat. It emulsifies it so you can absorb it.
Detergent for fat. I like that.
But during a long fast, 16 hours or more, your gallbladder is just dormant. It's not contracting. So the bile inside gets really thick, concentrated, and sludgy.
And my double cheeseburger was like pulling the fire alarm.
It was a 5-alarm fire. That sudden rush of fat into your intestine triggers a hormone that tells the gallbladder, contract, now, hard. And that intense, sudden squeeze on a sleepy organ trying to force out thick bile is what causes that sharp stabbing pain in your upper right abdomen. People always think it's their stomach, but it's often the gallbladder protesting.
So I had an acid war in my stomach and a gallbladder spasm happening at the same time. I really did everything wrong.
You created the perfect storm of digestive pain. And that's not even counting the third mechanism, which is purely behavioral.
Ah, yes. Behavioral overload. I was starving, so I just inhaled it.
Of course. And the analogy we use is perfect here. Your digestive system is like a high-performance sports car that's been sitting in the garage all night. You have to warm up the engine slowly. You don't just floor it.
And I floored it.
After 16 hours, your stomach is physically smaller, more contracted. When you dump a huge volume of dense food into it really fast, you stretch it violently. That rapid distension causes intense pressure pain, totally separate from the acid. You overwhelmed its physical capacity.
Okay, so a three-pronged attack. Acid bombardment, gallbladder spasm, and physical pressure pain. No wonder I felt like I was,
Yeah. To avoid that comprehensive system crash, we need to give some actual advice.
I am now qualified. I have earned the right. Rule 1, be gentle. Your first meal has to be about slowly waking the system up.
Right. Start with something liquid or soft, bone broth, a simple vegetable soup.
A little bit of low-fat yogurt, maybe scrambled egg, something small.
And you need to give it time. Eat that little starter meal, and then wait at least 30 minutes, maybe an hour, before you even think about eating something substantial.
And the what to avoid list is crucial. No high-fat food, so goodbye burger. No high-sugar things like a big glass of juice.
And, counterintuitively, not too much fiber right away. A giant raw salad, while healthy, can be too much bulk for a sleepy system.
Oh, good point.
Yeah.
And definitely nothing spicy or caffeinated. No stimulants.
And the last rule is non-negotiable. Chew slowly. I mean, painfully slowly. It gives your brain time to catch up with your stomach and send the I'm full signals before you've already eaten way too much.
Be gentle with your body. A lesson I learned the hard way.
Now that we know how to not create a disaster, let's talk about why people are even willing to risk it. Why is IF called a metabolic miracle?
The good stuff.
It comes down to these really profound internal shifts. It's way more than just saving a few calories. We're talking about 3 major physiological conversions.
This is the science that gets the biohackers so excited.
It is. So number 1, the big one, is metabolic switching.
Switching your fuel source.
Exactly. When you're eating normally, your body runs on glucose, sugar. It's stored in your liver and muscles as glycogen, and it's super easy to access.
Fast, easy energy.
But after about 12 to 16 hours of not eating, those glycogen stores run out. And your body, being incredibly smart, has to find a new fuel source to keep everything running, especially your brain.
And that's when it turns to fat.
Yes. It starts breaking down your stored body fat into fatty acids. Those go to your liver, and the liver converts them into these amazing little molecules called ketone bodies.
Ketones, I've heard so much about those.
And these ketones become the new primary fuel for your body and your brain. And this is why the biohackers claim they get such mental clarity during a fast. It's not in their heads.
So they're literally running on a different, more stable fuel source.
A cleaner, steadier burn than the ups and downs of glucose. It's a deep metabolic rewiring that only happens after you've used up all the easy sugar.
Okay, that's number 1. What's the second conversion?
The second is a huge one for modern health. Increased insulin sensitivity.
We all know that insulin resistance is at the root of so many problems, like type 2 diabetes.
And the logic here is just beautiful and simple. When you're constantly eating, your insulin levels are always high. Your cells get bombarded with the signal, and they eventually start to ignore it. That's insulin resistance.
They become deaf to the signal.
Perfectly put. But when you fast for 16 hours, you give your body a long, quiet period of very low insulin. It's a rest. It gives those cellular receptors a chance to reset and become sensitive to the signal again.
So you're giving your pancreas a vacation and making the insulin you do produce much more powerful.
Exactly. This is why it's a major tool for prediabetes. A big review in a major medical journal in 2023 highlighted how TRE can dramatically improve glucose tolerance just by giving the system a regular break.
Okay, metabolic switching and insulin sensitivity. What's the third one? The one with all the anti-aging hype?
Autophagy. Cellular self-cleaning.
It literally means self-eating, right?
It does. And it's probably the most exciting part of all this.
Yeah.
When your body is in that fasted state, that state of mild nutrient stress, it activates this incredible internal recycling program.
Okay, so how does a cell recycle itself?
Well, when there's no food coming in, the cell gets resourceful. It starts to identify and round up all of its old, broken junk parts.
Like misfolded proteins or damaged mitochondria or garbage.
Exactly. It wraps all that garbage up in a little membrane bubble, and then it merges that bubble with the lysosome, which is basically the cell's stomach.
The incinerator.
Or recycling plant. The enzymes inside break all that junk down into its basic building block, amino acids, fatty acids, and the cell can then use those raw materials to build new healthy parts.
Wow. So it literally turns its own trash into treasure.
That's why it's so linked to anti-aging and longevity. You're constantly clearing out the damage and rebuilding with fresh components. It's a deep cellular rejuvenation process.
And that's what the big studies at places like Harvard are looking at. The idea that this could protect our brains from neurodegenerative diseases as we age.
That's the hope. That by activating this repair process regularly, you can build a more resilient system over the long term.
So beyond those three big mechanisms, what are the proven measurable results we see in studies?
Well, in short-term studies, when people do it correctly, the results are pretty consistent. You see better blood lipid profiles, so lower triglycerides. You see a drop in body fat, lower markers of inflammation.
Lowered blood pressure too, right?
A significant drop in systolic blood pressure, yes. And to your earlier point about cognitive advantage, it's really starting to challenge that old myth that you have to eat breakfast for your brain to work.
Because you're just switching to a different fuel.
The adult brain is incredibly adaptable. Once it makes that switch to ketones, cognitive performance tends to be very stable. And for some people, it even improves. It's a much steadier fuel than sugar.
Okay, the promise is obviously huge. It's compelling. But we have to pivot. We have to address the giant red flag in the room.
The 91%.
The claim that eating in less than an 8-hour window could almost double your risk of cardiovascular death.
Yeah.
We have to put on our critical thinking hats and dissect this.
Absolutely. This headline caused a massive panic, and you can see why. First, let's talk about the source. The data was presented at the American Heart Association's 2024 Scientific Conference.
So, a very credible organization.
Very, but it's important to note this was a conference presentation, which often means the full data hasn't gone through the rigorous peer review process for publication in a journal yet. It's preliminary.
Okay. And who were they studying? What was the population?
They used a huge public database called NAAMS. It tracks the health and nutrition of Americans. They looked at over 20,000 adults and followed them for, on average, 8 years, some for as long as 17.
So a big sample size and a long follow-up. That's why it made such a splash.
For sure. And the specific finding was that the group who reported eating all their food in less than 8 hours a day.
So the most extreme fasters.
Right. They had a 91% higher risk of dying from cardiovascular disease compared to a control group that ate over a normal 12 to 16-hour window.
And it was even worse for people who were already sick.
That was the really alarming part. For people who already had heart disease, the risk was doubled. For people with cancer, the risk of cardiovascular death was 3 times higher.
That is just terrifying.
It is. But now we have to apply the most important caveat in all of science.
Let me guess. Correlation does not equal causation.
That is the absolute non-negotiable rule here. This was an observational study. It can only show a link, an association. It cannot, under any circumstances, prove that the short eating window caused the deaths.
Okay, so if the fasting isn't the direct cause, what's the big missing piece? What's the crucial blind spot in the data?
The blind spot is so big you could drive a truck through it. The study has no data on the quality of the food these people were eating.
It only tracked when they ate, not what they ate.
Precisely. And so the leading hypothesis among scientists looking at this is that the short eating window is just a proxy for a generally unhealthy lifestyle.
Explain that.
Think about the person who might be cramming all their food into 7 hours. The theory is that they are more likely to be using that window to binge on calorie-dense, nutrient-poor, highly processed foods.
So they fast all day, and then they hit the drive-through and eat 3,000 calories of junk in 2 hours.
Exactly. And that behavior, that cycle of fasting and then binging on garbage, creates an immense physiological shock. You get these huge, violent spikes in blood sugar, triglycerides, and blood pressure.
Which puts acute, massive stress on your heart and your entire circulatory system.
Doing that day after day, year after year, that could easily explain the increased cardiovascular risk. The damage is likely coming from the metabolically dangerous feasting, not the fasting.
So the 91% number might not be about the clock at all. It might be about the food choices that correlate with that extreme behavior.
That's the most rational interpretation of the data we have. And there are other confounding factors too, right? We don't have good data on their exercise habits, their stress levels, whether they smoked, how well they slept. Any one of those things is a massive driver of heart disease, and they often travel with poor dietary habits. You simply can't isolate the time window as the sole culprit.
So the real takeaway from that scary headline isn't "don't fast." It's more like, if you fast, what you eat when you break your fast is critically important, especially if you have a pre-existing condition.
That is the essential conclusion, and it highlights a really important clinical warning. Almost any specialist treating chronic diseases, heart disease, cancer, kidney disease, will tell you not to attempt extreme forms of fasting without close medical supervision. The risks are just too high for vulnerable patients to manage on their own.
So we've looked at the metabolic promise, we've deconstructed the scary headline. Where does the scientific community actually land on this? After all the big studies, does IF have some kind of unique metabolic magic for weight loss?
I think the consensus now, based on the best and biggest trials, is probably a little disappointing for the biohackers, but it's very clear. Calorie deficit is king.
Ah, the boring, simple truth of thermodynamics.
It always comes back to that. The gold standard study on this came out in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2022. It was a huge, year-long, randomized controlled trial.
What did they do?
They took a large group of people and split them in two. Group A was put on a simple calorie-restricted diet. Group B was told to eat the exact same number of calories, but they had to do it within a 16.8 IF window.
So they isolated the variable of timing. Same calories, different clocks.
Exactly. They wanted to see if the timing itself added any extra benefit, and after a full year, the conclusion was unmistakable.
No difference.
No statistically significant difference in weight loss between the two groups. Both groups lost weight because both were in a calorie deficit. The timing didn't add any extra magic.
Wow. So that really confirms that IF is a fantastic behavioral tool, not a magical metabolic one.
It's a time-limited shopping app, like you said. It's a really simple, effective way to help people eat less food without having to meticulously count every calorie. You just skip a meal, and boom, you've cut out 500 calories.
It makes achieving the deficit easier.
And this was confirmed by another German study more recently. They put people on a 10-hour eating window, but they were very careful to make sure they did not reduce their total calories.
And what happened when calories were the same, just in a shorter window?
Nothing. No measurable improvements in metabolic markers, which again just pounds home the point. The benefit comes from eating less food, not from the clock on the wall.
So we've established it's a tool, not a magic bullet. Let's talk about the dark side, the potential pitfalls that you don't always hear about in the fasting forums.
Well, the stress of it can have real physiological consequences. There was some fascinating research in the journal Cell recently.
What did it find?
It suggested that the same systemic stress that activates all the good stuff, like autophagy, can also be bad for non-essential processes.
For instance,
hair growth.
The research suggested that the stress hormones released during fasting can actually harm the stem cells in your hair follicles, slowing down their ability to regenerate. So people who say they experience hair loss when they're dieting or fasting, that's a real thing.
It appears to be a real mechanistic link. It's a serious trade-off to consider. Better metabolic health might come at the cost of your hair density.
And what about the psychological risks? The pressure of being so rigid.
That's a huge one. When the restriction gets extreme, like one meal a day, or OMAD.
Which some studies have linked to a higher mortality risk as well.
Right, likely due to just massive nutritional deficiencies. But the psychological pressure can be immense. It can raise your cortisol, your main stress hormone.
And it can trigger disordered eating, right?
Absolutely. It can lead to binge eating, where you're so hungry you just lose control when the window opens. Or, perhaps even more insidiously, it can lead to orthorexia.
Let's define that for everyone.
Orthorexia is an unhealthy obsession with eating healthy or purer foods. In this context, it's an obsession with the perfect timing, the perfect clean meal. Food stops being about nourishment and enjoyment and becomes about rigid rules and self-punishment. And that chronic stress can cancel out many of the benefits you're seeking.
And I guess the final biggest limitation is just we don't have the long-term data.
We are in the middle of a massive, uncontrolled public experiment. The best studies we have are for a year, maybe 2. We have no idea what the cumulative effect of doing this for 20, 30, or 40 years is. We just don't know if it's safe or superior to just simple moderation over a lifetime.
And it's not a one-size-fits-all prescription.
Not at all. We're seeing more and more research showing it affects people differently based on their age, their sex, their starting body composition. A new study showed the immune system of a lean person reacts completely differently to fasting than an obese person's.
So what works for a healthy 30-year-old could be genuinely harmful for someone who's 65 and has other health issues.
Which is why, if you're going to make a dramatic shift like this, you really should do it with some professional guidance.
All right, this has been a journey. We've gone from my stomach ache to cellular biology to massive population studies. Let's try to wrap this all up in a final rational summary for the listener who's wondering whether to start the clock or run from it.
Okay, my rational summary is this. Intermittent fasting is a powerful tool. It does activate real, scientifically proven repair mechanisms in your body. Autophagy is real. Metabolic switching is real. But its main, most reliable benefit is as a behavioral tool to help you achieve a calorie deficit. That's its superpower.
And the risk.
The risk seems to be almost entirely tied to extreme execution windows, less than 8 hours, and most importantly, ignoring food quality. If you use fasting as an excuse to eat garbage, you're probably doing more harm than good. Fasting is not a get-out-of-jail-free card for a bad diet.
And my practical summary, as someone who has now felt the pain, is that for a healthy person, a moderate 16.8 schedule can be a really simple, effective way to manage your weight. But if you're chasing longevity, remember this. What you eat is almost certainly far more important than when you eat it.
Well said.
Focusing on nutrient-dense, quality food in your eating window will always give you more benefit than just focusing on the clock.
We hope we've given you the tools to look at the headlines and the hype with a bit more critical, independent thought.
And as always, if you're thinking about a major dietary change, especially if you have health conditions, please talk to a professional. Knowledge is great, but guidance is safety.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. It's one of the most fascinating and confusing topics in health right now.
Always a pleasure to untangle it all with you.
And before we go, please remember to subscribe to Sip and Talk wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss one of these conversations.
And a quick shout out to our old friend Mickey. Check out his YouTube channel. It's called Mickytolife. His latest travel vlogs are hilarious and just a great escape.
And that brings us to next week. We're making a really interesting transition. This week was about self-discipline and internal biology.
Fasting.
Next week, we're talking about the technological solution. We're dissecting the biggest phenomenon in medicine right now. GLP-1 drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy.
Oh, this is a huge one. Are they the holy grail for longevity and health? The cure for the obesity crisis, or are they just a very expensive quick fix that's going to create a whole new set of problems?
Inequality, dependency, unknown long-term side effects. Fasting was about willpower. This is about a pharmaceutical fix.
Join us next time as we dive into the science, the cost, and the huge social impact of the weight loss shot revolution.
We'll see you then.